Hey guys, welcome back to the Derezzed podcast on clownfishtv.com. This is Neon, and I am here with Peter Pischke from Culturescape. Hey Peter, how you doing?
I'm doing good. A little worn out, but good.
Yeah. Peter's actually written for us before on clownfishtv.com. He did some very good interviews and some very good in-depth reporting, and I really appreciate that. And we're going to talk about the state of nerd culture, the nerd wars, all the stuff that's going on right now. Why are nerds so angry? Why are nerd blogs kind of withering on the vine? And I don't know where this conversation is going to go. We'll see where it goes. But definitely appreciate you coming on, Peter. We have to catch up. We haven't talked at length in quite a while.
Yeah, I'm happy to do so. And I of course love Clownfish TV. I love all you guys do. I watch the show. My mom watches your show. It's always funny when I come visit and I hear cool. Geeky Sparkles ranting about something that always gives me a chuckle. So yeah, no, I love what you guys do, and I'm always happy to talk with you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so I wanted to talk because I've noticed. And I guess this is sort of a reintroduction to the Derez podcast. We took a hiatus for a couple months, and we're coming back. The focus of this episode, I think, is just it seems like there has been a sea change in nerd culture. Like we went through the whole culture war thing, and we can talk about how maybe that started. And it seems like, at least on some level, maybe I'm being overly optimistic, but it seems like we're on the other side of it now. It seems like a lot of walls are kind of coming down. I know that you've been talking to some folks who have been pretty vocal against, I would say, more conservative voices in the pop culture space. And they've actually taken the time to talk to you, which I think is pretty cool. But where do you think things are at right now, Peter?
I think everything is shifting. I don't know if it's planned in any way. It feels more chaotic to me. And so it's a mix of people who are actually having the comeuppance and are, their come to Jesus moment, actually want to do better. And I think the other part is people who they see that everything under them is sand and they're looking for places that are rock. And they see that area over there on YouTube where there's it's not just strictly one side. I can go over there and be safe. So I think it's a mix of people who don't know where to get their next meal is and people who actually want to do better. Both things are positives, by the way, even if the intentions are different.
So I guess the question I have then is, how do you tell the difference? How do you tell if someone has actually had, especially like journalists that have spent the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years attacking fandoms? How do you know that they've actually had a come to Jesus moment? How do you know that they're not going to just use the opportunity to build themselves a new platform and then turn right around and attack fans again?
Yeah, I know that's the trick, right? I'm not a mind reader. I think maybe examining behavior. If the behavior improved, I've noticed, some people that I talk to, and if they're just going back to just acting how they were previously, it does seem like, well, they just were waiting until they were in a place again where they're more comfortable, where they could set up their new nest or their new fortress to, throw rocks from. But other than that, I don't know. I guess examining behavior is probably really the only way you can tell if a person has changed.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some really interesting things. I think it was Jimmy Palmiotti was on Eric July's show. Yeah. People tell me that. Yeah. He was kind of against, he was never really like hard in the paint against YouTubers, comic YouTubers per se, but, he would say stuff here and there. It was like, okay, he's, but then all of a sudden now he's on Eric July's show. And like I said, you talked to, I know Taylor Lawrence, you talked to her?
Yeah. I talked to Taylor Renz just this week for my show Culturescape. We talked with Brianna Wu. That was wild.
Yeah. That Brianna Wu, that shocks me. Now, for those of you who don't know, and God, I don't have enough time to go into detail in this podcast, but there are archives upon archives. But she was a huge personality in the Gamergate fiasco. And she was one of the last people I ever would have imagined would have said, hey, let's try talking to the other side. You know,
It is bizarre. It is so weird. It does feel like, cats and dogs sleeping together. I do think really though, for Brianna and even Taylor to some extent, I do think it is honest. And
Mhm.
it's because because they stepped out of line from the clique that they were in for whatever reason. Now they're receiving all the fire, and that is causing some self-examination, as it were. I think for Brianna, it's definitely that she feels like the politics of her side has become unproductive,
Mhm.
and she wants to become someone that can make a difference in the sphere she cares about. And when she does, then she gets attacked, and then she says, "Well, this seems to me a lot like everything I went with Gamergate," and that leads to introspection, and that's kind of like I think why she's reaching out. With Taylor, I think it's because news is completely imploded.
Yeah.
And so she's I think it's sincere, but people are saying maybe it's just because she feels like there's no point in defending that other side. That could be true too. It's hard to tell, but it is changing. Like, it's changing in a huge way. The news industry is fundamentally changed now and forever, and that will change how our culture works. Culture is the end point of communications, and
Yeah.
in the way things are happening in news, different things will be communicated in different ways by different people, looking to be far less people also. And that will change things in a big way, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that there's also doom and gloom around journalism and pop culture journalism and video game journalism, especially. We talk about this at length on the channel. It seems like it has been the first to go because I hate to say it, but it's like the most non-essential news,
Mm-hmm.
right? And a lot of these sites were kind of propped up artificially. A lot of them were arms of movie studios or whatever that they were using. Look at like Nerdist. And I think they started out with the best of intentions, but they got gobbled up by Legendary, and then they just became kind of a mouthpiece, for Hollywood, for promotion. And none of this stuff is really sustainable anymore. I mean, we're running into this ourselves. We own multiple websites, and I've seen the worst drop off in advertising I have seen in the 15 plus years that I've been managing websites. I've never seen anything like it. It's just completely just blown through like a freaking hurricane and just destroyed so many outlets. And, then we have the venture capital running out that propped up a lot of these sites too. But, I could almost argue, and I think if you go back and look at the history of like the nerd wars, I think the media played a huge role in that. I think the media stoked a lot of fires, poured kerosene on embers to turn it into like a big deal. Again, going back to Gamergate, going to Ghostbusters 2016, The Last Jedi, whatever these like huge dramas were, right? It was always, you look at why they blew up, and it was usually some variation of fans don't like this. Okay, let's write 5,000 articles about what horrible people they are. And then it just polarizes people even more. Like, wait a second, just because I don't like your stupid Star Wars movie doesn't mean I'm a literal Nazi. Yes, you are.
Yeah, definitely. I remember, you can remember this, TDS, who's a prolific Twitter user.
Yeah.
He had put that list of like Disney bots. And I think Geeky was even saying, that this is all true, but we've seen this going on for a long time. I can remember before Obi-Wan had come out, and Disney was already had all these press releases, and there's these Twitter anon accounts on Twitter already going about how the racist people were being to the show, and it's like the show's not even out yet. Like people can't comment yet because it doesn't exist. But they were like also ready to go, and I think people. I think by now at least people have gotten wise to the plan that so much of this outreach seems pretty fake. But outrage. The problem with the media is that going into the 2010s, the reason why the outrage machine got so big was because they didn't really have a plan or an edge to generate an audience online. They made the mistake in the 90s when they made the deal with the devil that would become Google and the other search providers, that basically they would handle all advertising outreach, and thus they would have the lion's share of the funds. Going into the 2010s, you have like giant online blog machines like what we call now the Gizmodo network. And at that point, it was like you are expected to put out 8 articles a day, and you're getting paid on how much traffic you get. So the incentive there was not to do very ethical journalism, not to double check your facts. It's just to spout as much crap as much as you can, and to hopefully you get a lot of clicks for it. Unfortunately, somehow that took hold, and the bigger sites like New York Times, Washington Post, they noticed that, oh wow, when we make people mad, when we get more comments, we get more traffic, and so that became the pattern for all of journalism, basically. Unless you're like a very niche specific thing, or you're like Politico and you're not actually selling to an audience, you're selling to employers.
Yeah.
It was about how can we take any topic and how we can make people really angry. But that had a shelf life. I think we're seeing that shelf life because I think people have wisened up to the point that like, I really don't believe you. I don't care. I know you're just playing me up. And I think also the role of AI, how it's just decimated search, but also the entertainment industry. I think none of these institutions like Disney, for example, which so much relies on this tactic to drum up interest, they don't have the money to pay for it. And so all the cogs in this outrage machine that was so strong for over a decade and a half is now falling apart.
Yeah, it was interesting because, kind of how the culture war, I guess, got started, or at least kicked into high gear, was people reacting to those reactionary blog posts, right? So you had people that were out there saying, well, if you don't like this movie, you're a racist and a Nazi and a homophobe. Well, no, I'm not. And then it almost became a very parasitical relationship, right? Like you had the people writing the articles, and then you had the YouTubers reacting. I'm guilty of that too, reacting to the articles. And then there'd be another article about the YouTubers and how ridiculous they are. And then they would start grabbing tweets and the bigots are mad. And it's just like, it just kept escalating. And now it seems like somebody just let the helium out of the balloon, and everything's deflating.
People are just done with it. They're just not having it the same way.
So where do you think things are going to go next? I mean, we've talked some about, citizen journalism, and I almost feel like we're going back to the days of like fanzines, except instead of fanzines, we have podcasts, YouTube channels, probably paywalled, like Substack, blogs. That's just my own personal opinion. You have people that are making money on Twitter now.
Yeah, I think journalism is going to be a deflated balloon. Like it is sickening to me. I was talking to a friend who runs a tiny conservative publishing house, and he was talking about, he went to Boston University last year to see his daughter graduate, and they have the liberal arts journalism program. There's like 400 people, and he says to me, I don't see morally how the people at that school can justify themselves to take all these young people, to promise them all so much, knowing it'll never pay out, not once, and to take all their money and go through with it. And he's right, because journalism is deflating. What's probably is going to happen, at least for the short time foreseeable future, is it will be influencers, mostly the people who are established as journalists right now. So people who are like Taylor Renz, they're bigger names, they're known quantities, they'll be fine. But for most people who are trying to climb the ladder, there is no bottom rung. And as the people who age out, more and more of this is just going to shift to AI. The question is, how does journalism come back? I don't know if it does. It may be that this is just a small independent person here, independent person there, and just a bunch of YouTubers. The very broad could be what happens.
Yeah, I mean, even YouTube though, AI could change that, could decimate that, because you can have AI generate voice, images, scripts. I mean, you theoretically in 3 to 5 years, you could just say, make me a video about this topic, write the script, use an artificial voice, artificial voiceover, use Sora to generate the images, or create static images or whatever, and boom, go, And I could actually see Google creating videos to answer questions. People plug a question into Google. Well, please tell me about the gold rush. Okay, we're going to generate an AI YouTube video about the history of the gold rush. Boom, there it is. And then it sits out on YouTube and racks up the views, and all the money goes to Google because they made the video, right?
Yeah, I hate it. This other day, I like studying history, so I watch a lot of YouTube history videos, especially if I'm trying to sleep. And then every now and then, I'm bumping into a completely AI generated channel. So it's
Yeah.
like a generated voice, generated scripts. I don't think the AI images themselves are generated, but I do think they're scraped from online, and it annoys me. There's something about it because it's not human.
Yeah.
It just doesn't have the same quality. But on the other hand, I look at the channel and it's like, this video has 250,000 views. It's
Yes.
doing just fine.
And
And I'm like,
that's the problem, because the thing is that the AI is going to know, what's going to work. And if Google's generating the content, and just hypothetically speaking, they're generating the content, they're going to generate the content to be the most SEO optimized, and Google's going to favor its own content, because the reason I think YouTubers are taking off in search is when you search for a topic, guess what's at the top of the page? It's YouTube. Why? Because Google owns it. So if you can answer questions with Google in a video, you're going to show up at the top of the search results. And it's hard to compete with that when you've got a blog. You got to send people to a blog, because even now, they've got the AI result, and then you ask a question: how do you beat this level in The Legend of Zelda? Well, here's a 1-paragraph answer. You don't have to wade through 13 paragraphs of ranting about Trump or where the hell they're doing over on Kotaku to get the answer. It's just boom, there it is. But yeah, I can totally see a day when that happens, and I don't know where that puts pop culture journalism or nerd culture, because we've introduced this level of artificiality, and it's not just the journalism, it's not just the baiting the fans or antagonizing the fans. It's pretty soon going to be the content itself. I mean, going back to Google, I just did a video on the gaming channel today that they're able to generate entire platformers, 2D platform games from prompts. Where is that going to be in 5 years? Are we going to be are we going to be having shared experiences talking about video games because everybody's got their own video game made a la carte, their own movie made a la carte? I think that's going to definitely change things.
It's really hard. AI is such a different thing. I mean, that I'm very libertarian, so I generally think over the long term, markets usually figure it out. But AI is so weird. It does make me question my faith in the power of the enlightenment and free enterprise, because I'm like, this is just so different, and it's looking to take so many humans out of the equation. I just don't know. I think it's always a good lesson, though, if anyone is interested in working in media and its forms, to never think that that you have the perfect lunch, that what you're doing now is going to always be there, because there's so many people that have made this mistake, that they're hot and they're star one moment, something changes, maybe their outlet doesn't hold them, maybe the attention goes away, maybe one day Google or Twitter, now X, or Facebook says, no, actually I don't like you anymore. Anything can happen, and I think it's an important lesson people should take away. And you see, I know you well enough that you always make sure to diversify your options, because you just don't know, like, is this ground I'm staying on now going to be here tomorrow? And that feels very true at the moment.
So kind of to take us back, I mean, we took this detour down into AI uncanny valley here, but it's permeated everything, right? So it's kind of hard not to talk about, especially when you're talking about pop culture and journalism and all that. But like, do you think that we are starting to see, and I've noticed it in comics, I've noticed it with movies, that we're starting to see studios and publishers pivot back to the tried and true? Like in comics right now, the biggest comic last year was Transformers #1. Well, what did it do? Well, it gave us Transformers that just turned into cars, and they didn't talk about gender ideology. They just turned into cars and blew shit up. I mean, that's what people want, right? We're seeing, leaks from the new Superman movie, and it looks very back to basics. Just Superman. He looks like Superman. The cast looks right. I mean, so do you think that we might actually see a pivot back to, I guess, more traditional geek fare in an attempt to win back audiences, not because the studios think they were ever in the wrong, but because they have to survive?
Yeah, I don't think anyone is. No, if anyone is waiting for that moment where the companies or these media people ever say, I was wrong, that's never going to happen. It's never coming. But I think you are correct, though. I think Ultimate Spider-Man right now is probably my favorite Marvel comic in a very long time. which surprises me because I hated the alternate universe back in the day. But it's actually good. It's like this is normal Spider-Man with a family. And I love it. I love it. It's fantastic.
It's where it would have been, right? I mean, it's where it would have been.
Yeah.
Had they not messed with the marriage, right?
Yeah. Let's not the less we bring up the Marvel's version of the devil.
Yeah.
And, I don't want to go down the road.
Right.
That's going to trigger me, as they say.
Well, okay, so that might actually, let's roll back a little bit more. One More Day, I think, was one of the first battles of the Nerd Wars that I can remember. I think it actually predates Gamergate by several years. Was it like 2008? Was that when they did that? 2007?
Yeah, it was before Spectacular Spider-Man.
Yeah,
that was in the early 2010s.
And that was Joe Quesada, I think, was like, oh yeah, we want to make Peter Parker a teenager now because, nobody wants old married Peter Parker. It's like, well, no, actually a lot of people did. You had to renew your vows. That did really well. Ultimate Spider-Man's doing really well. Apparently there's a market for happily married Peter Parker, but whatever.
I mean, come on. I mean, Tobey Maguire, like everyone's favorite 40-year-old trying to be a high schooler, that seemed to work just fine. I don't understand.
Yeah.
I don't understand. We're like, oh well, actually, people will put up with that. But whatever. I know I'm talking to the peanut gallery there.
Yeah, I mean, but it seemed like that was one of the first. It was 2007. I just had to Google it. I know it's been a while because I'm like, man, that was before Disney bought them. I kept thinking that was like
so bad.
Stupid Disney decision, but it was like, no, the stupid decision started before Disney. But that to me seemed to signal the beginning of publishers just really honestly not giving a crap what the audience thought. They're going to do what they're going to do. It doesn't matter how much people complain. In fact, they got off on it. They actually loved that people were complaining. They're like, shut up. It's our character. We can do whatever we want. Da, 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 da. Mm-hmm. And, that's been a point of contention for years. And then, of course, we kind of rolled right into, Gamergate a few years later. And then we kind of rolled into the Ghostbusters thing. But I think, at least from where I'm sitting, like nerds have always been contentious because I remember back in the day going to the comic shop and people would argue about stuff, whatever. But it never took on the life that it has in the, until more recently, until the last like 10 years, where it's like, I mean, people are like literally trying to destroy other people's lives over pop culture shit. I just absolutely insane. And then you start getting on the right wing side, you start getting people like, Ben Shapiro talking about Star Wars and stuff. And it just got really damn weird. I mean, everything got weird. It was like, this is like above and beyond just nerds raging about a thing they don't like or being disappointed about a thing. This is like, I mean, literally become like a life and death to people. And well, I just don't understand it.
I actually know about that because I was working in conservative media more so during that time. And it was a constant frustration because, and this is kind of how Taylor and I, when we first met, how we got along is, she's done very well for herself, but she'll tell you it's always been, despite the success she's had, it's always been a pain in the half to get the editors and the people at formerly the New York Times, now Washington Post, to take these issues about what happens online seriously. They just had, for Taylor, they had zero interest with how people actually consume content online. They just thought, the journalistic class itself, from where it is culturally, they just thought talking about what happens on Instagram or TikTok or YouTube was beneath them. And she felt like, no, this is, and I know a ton of people aren't a fan of hers, but I'll give her credit on this point, that it actually was worthwhile talking about, the people that the vast majority of people today actually engage with. And it wasn't dissimilar in conservative media. It still is that point where it's like they only have interest in these things as long as they think it will drum up support. And I've talked with the Daily Wire before, and there are people over there who are nerds per se, but the Daily Wire asks, will this get us a lot of clicks or not? And that's really their only interest in the matter.
So let's talk about that, because that kind of brings me to the current state of things right now. When we first started getting into this stuff on YouTube, our original podcast goes back to like 2013, 2014. We've been doing this for a while. And we've had websites for about 15 years now. We were doing comics for years. And so we've always been in like the pop culture space, right? At least for the most of our marriage, my wife and I, we've been like going to cons. One of our first dates was at a Comic-Con. I mean, it's just something we've always been into. And I saw a lot of people come into this space that on both sides of the political spectrum that were clearly just in it for the outrage clicks. People that you listen to them. Yeah, I'm not naming names and I'm just saying it's just any nerd worth their salt, right? You listen to these people and you're like, this person has never watched an episode of whatever show they're bitching about. This person has never played this game. This person has never read an issue of X-Men. This person has never, you know what I'm saying? And that chaps my ass. I'm going to be honest because I'm like, wait a second. So we've already got like this, all these media outlets attacking nerds, but then it felt like we had a bunch of people that were coming in that were kind of just being dishonest about their intention. Like, why are we talking about this? Again, what did for me was like, and I'm not, no offense, but I'm not a fan of the Daily Wire, right? I don't watch talking heads either side of the aisle. I don't really care. But when I'm like, okay, now Ben Shapiro is going to pretend to care about Star Wars. Now Matt Walsh is going to pretend to care about anime.
Yep.
I mean, I'm like, come on, dude. Like, you're not kidding anybody. But then on the same token, on the other side, you've got people that are like, they're mad at the bigots about the bigotry or whatever. And it's like, well, clearly they've never been a part of this scene either. So you just have like these people on both sides that are not fans of pop culture. And part of me feels like, if nothing else, everything that's going on in journalism right now is kind of washing away all the muck and the grime and the whatever. And we're starting to see like, okay, we've got nerds in both camps. Maybe politically people don't get along as well as they should, but at least because it used to be like gaming brought us together, comics brought us together, movies brought us together, and they've been used as cudgels to attack us with. And it's disgusting because that was supposed to be our entertainment, our escape, our stories around the campfire to bring us together and realize that we actually had more in common with one another. And everyone's been using it as a means to attack the other side, and it's absolutely disgusting.
I agree, and this is kind of my frustration. So my foolishness, my innocence, my naivete, as it were. I would go, growing up, I would go to like magic card nights, and you'd have all kinds of randos, like people of all ages. I mean, obviously mostly men, but you'd have all kinds of people there. Those kind of experiences left a really strong impression on me. Or I go to anime conventions.
Yes.
While maybe the people there aren't the best group, it's amazing that you can go to so many people with so many different life backgrounds and views, ethnicities, religions, whatever. And we can all just enjoy the thing. And hey, look, Johnny Bosch is here. We all love him in Bleach. Let's go. Let's talk about how much we love Johnny Bosch. That was awesome. That's what I thought the culture wars with the right. I would thought that naively that's what they wanted to. We just want to stop. We don't want to feel like we have to dominate or take over anything. We just kind of want things to be like normal. Back to basics, baseline. And the mistake I made, though, unfortunately, I think people are starting to see it, and it's especially true on YouTube and certain parts of YouTube these days, where their interest in the nerd stuff, while some of them are actually nerds, I think their love is more in the fight, and I think to the detriment of some of these things, because it's like we have this new X-Men show that's coming out, and there's some things that are like, maybe this will be woke, but then there's a lot there that says actually maybe it won't. But there's such a strong push. We're like, no, it's woke. Don't get out of line, Pete. It's woke.
I can't even talk about it. I actually said, look, I'm cautiously. The reason I'm cautiously optimistic about the X-Men show, like look, I have no illusions. I know this is current year Disney. I know they have their mandates. I know that you got to work within that framework, right? But I know that the showrunner was the guy who was a writer on The Witcher. And he came out and said that they were deviating too much from the source material. He didn't want to be a part of it. It almost cost him his career because his coworkers came after him for that. But he stuck to his guns. And this guy said, I want to give people an authentic X-Men experience. It's like, I'm just that the fact that he's saying that, doing that, sticking his neck out like that, I'm willing to give it a chance. It might suck. It might be horrible. It might be terrible, but I'm willing to believe that this guy is giving us probably the best he can do given where Disney's at currently. Is that fair?
I agree.
I think that's fair.
I think if people, as an action step, I think what we need to try to do is, even though we feel like our trust has been abused so many times, especially by these big companies, we should try to at least try to be fair to these things and not just reflexively, oh, this will always be terrible. One of the problems I think anyone that's ever been in a relationship has learned that if you have a carrot and a stick, if you're only ever using the stick, is that relationship ever going to get better?
Yeah.
No, obviously, no, it won't. It will never get better because you'll just always end up paying each other forever and ever. And if nerds, fans, whatever, if all you're ever going to do is they announce a new show or there's a new comic or there's some new edition of game and you're just going to poo-poo on it automatically, never give it the time of day. These other companies, these other groups, they have no reason to try to be better. So my point of view, if these companies like Disney and they're desperate, so like, you know what, we're going to give you X-Men like it was before Disney owned it. And I'm like, good. Okay, I'll give you a chance.
Yeah.
And if it's good, then I should praise it. I want to send that signal. Thank you, Disney. I appreciate it. For once in your miserable time owning this property, you've done the right thing. Thank you. But I think that there are a bit too many people who have a vested, for whatever reason, I won't be fair. That's not fair to say they have a vested, but for whatever reason, won't be willing to go there. I think that is a problem. I don't think that's much different than how the media has been either. And I think if we all want just enjoy our nerd stuff again, I think we're going to have to learn to do that. But maybe that is too much of a big ask, or it's too soon to ask of that. But I do think that's eventually where people will have to go.
I was talking to a friend of mine about this a couple of weeks ago, and it's ironic that X-Men has become such a divisive show, right? Because it reminds me of the difference in philosophies between Charles Xavier and Magneto. Charles Xavier wanted to fight for the right to coexist peacefully with humans. Magneto wanted to destroy the other side. He wanted to subjugate the other side. And I feel like there are some people out there in this space that they're not going to be content with just, being like, hey, this one's not for me, but it can still exist. Or, It's going to be like, no, not until we get rid of every trace of wokeness from every show ever. And it's like, well, that's not realistic because it's never been that way. It's never been. We're going to get rid of every trace of progressive themes from Star Trek. I mean, come on. Could we make Star Trek better? Hell yeah. You want to talk about, reluctantly going back. Picard, I didn't even watch season 1, 2. I watched 2 episodes of the first season. I'm like, I know this is going to make me angry. This is not what I wanted. This is not Picard. This is not Next Gen. This is Blade Runner. This isn't what I wanted. So I noped out. I'm like, you know what? I'm already disgruntled about, and look, Next Generation is one of my top 3 favorite shows of all time. So I'm like, I'm not even going to do this to myself. Just like I didn't watch The Rise of Skywalker. I'm like, I'm not going to put myself through this. This is not how Star Wars ends. Star Wars ends at episode 6. That's it. That's in my headcanon. That's what it's going to be. It took me about 6 weeks to get around to watching Picard, and I freaking loved it. Season 3, not
Season 3 is amazing.
Season 3 is amazing because we had people that cared and they finally got it. They're like, this is what we do. So I'm like, look, if Paramount never does anything right again with Star Trek, at least we got a proper send off for the Next Generation crew. It undid the damage of the movies because the movies were, other than First Contact, they were pretty terrible. And they fixed it. And we got a proper send off, and I'm happy. I'm like, I could never watch another Star Trek episode ever. You could stop making Star Trek tomorrow, and that ending of season 3 of Picard, I'm good with it. And but that again, I think that was a reaction to fans being like, yeah, Discovery, that ain't where it's at. Picard season 1, 2, that's not what we wanted. But people had to be willing to give it a chance. I was wrong about Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. I thought that it was going to be ridiculous based on the way the media portrayed the marketing behind it. They had some people that were producers on the show or directors, and they were saying that, we're going to basically tear men down and show the sensitive side of men, and we're going to emasculate the men, and ha ha ha, it's so funny. And I think those comments were either not reflective of the production in its entirety or taken out of context by the media, because the movie I saw did not do that. The movie I saw was actually pretty good. And that was another one. I waited like 6 months to watch it. And I only watched it because I was bored as hell. And I'm like, I paid for this thing on Vudu. I might as well watch it. And I watched it and I'm like, well, damn it. If the media hadn't been out there bragging about how much, men were going to hate the D&D movie and how much they were going to emasculate, I probably would have gone to see this movie in the theater. And I would have enjoyed the hell out of it.
The chonky dragon in that movie is fantastic.
Oh my God. I love that. I love that. I mean, there was so much, it was a pleasant surprise. So that, there are good things out there. We're seeing it in comics. We're seeing it in video games, not in the AAA space necessarily, but we're seeing so many good indie games come out. I mean, this is like a golden era of PC gaming, of indie games. And, but it gets buried under these big discussions about, Star Wars and Marvel and,
Yeah, it's hard because, you work in YouTube and, certain things will get attention and certain others won't. And so that does make it hard. I think when it comes to wokeness, trying to do, this is always an interesting conversation when you try to talk to people on the other side, because it's hard to come to a concrete definition of what you agree wokeness even is. It definitely has a sense of like the famous Supreme Court ruling. I can't define, I don't know if this is going to go on YouTube. So adult content, but I know it when I see it. And wokeness, as we think of it, often is. But I think the problem with wokeness, that is the problem at heart, is the intention and its subversion. If wokeness is not being subverted, but there are political themes, but they aren't there to undermine the audience, they're just part of. I think that's fine. I think I go back to one of my favorite people to talk to ever is Chuck Dixon. I love Chuck Dixon. That man, lovely, lovely, wonderful man. He talks about back in the day in the 90s, on his just really epic runs on Batman and Robin, with the Batman properties especially, but not just. He talks about working with, famous artist and editor Danny O'Neill. And Danny was a bleeding hard leftist. They were about as apart politically, their cultural backgrounds as apart as you could get, but they were just perfect together. And when they approach stories, say they had the story of, and he talks about this on Culturescape, when they were talking about the character's spoiler and they were bringing her back, they wanted to do more stories with her. They're talking about, spoilers can go through this horrible thing. We're going to talk about teen pregnancy. We're going to talk abortion. We're going to talk about all these hard themes. And we won't lean into either one or the other. We'll have some characters that feel a certain way, other characters that will feel another way. And at the end of it, we'll just let the readers decide. And I think that's a good way to put it. It's fine if there are political themes. I know something like True Detective Season 3, not this new show, but True Detective Season 3 is excellent, but it does have racial and political themes. Does that necessarily make it woke, in my opinion? No, because they're not attacking, they're not denigrating the audience, they're not trying to undermine anything. They're just trying to tell a story with a certain point of view of a narrative, and they're doing it fairly. And I think that's ultimately what people should ask for.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, people, bringing up Star Trek again, people, when they criticize the new shows on Paramount and they say that they're woke, and Star Trek's always been woke. I'm like, no. Star Trek's always been progressive. The difference is, like, if you look at those episodes, especially of Next Generation, they were dealing with very topical subjects. I mean, you can go back and remember the headlines, like, oh, this one's about assisted suicide. This one's about that kid that got caned in Singapore, Wesley Crusher. They were going to cane him for stepping on the grass or whatever. And you can kind of make that parallel. But like you said, it didn't preach at you. A lot of times they would try to show you both sides of the story. And sometimes they actually would create sympathy for the villains. I mean, I felt like the Klingons, they humanized the Klingons. So we had to bring in the Cardassians because we needed a new bad guy because the Klingons were too human. And, so you don't get that now. Now you get ham-fisted. These are the bad guys, and they're bad because they're bigots and they're privileged, and it's like, oh, come on, that's like low-hanging fruit, right? And nobody's like, when you preach at somebody like that, they're immediately going to get their backs up. And for me, like I would define wokeness as if you took that approach and you replaced politics with religion, if you would consider that to be propaganda, then it's woke. Because to me, it's almost like wokeness is almost its own religion, cult-like. It's like a cult-like perversion of progressive and liberal values. Is that a pretty fair?
That seems pretty fair. Yeah. It is an ideology, but it's also a method.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's about converting or shaming the other side. And like a religion, if you step out of line, you get shunned or attacked or stoned. I'm not saying, now I want to be clear, not saying every religion. I'm saying, like, I'm thinking more extreme examples. I'm thinking cults. I'm thinking, what I'm saying. But I guess the difference is, to me, wokeness would be the cult equivalent of a religious cult. Like, religion itself is fine. When it becomes a cult, it becomes a problem. Liberalism, progressive values, that's fine. When it becomes a cult and it becomes more aggressive, then that becomes a problem.
I guess the big question, I guess, as part of this conversation is, at what point do you, at what point do you forgive a company, or do you forgive a person that was woke or was these culture warriors? Or is there never going to be a point? Like, what do you do? And this goes back to, kind of where we start with the question of what happens to pop culture journalism.
Yeah.
Like, if these people, if their behavior has changed, do we forgive them, or do we never let it go? That seems to be like the question of the moment. I don't have a good answer for it. I lean towards, I'm a very forgiving kind of person. I grew up very Christian, so maybe I'm a little bit too quick to forgive. But I know a lot of people who are like, no, we should never forgive them ever.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I'm wrestling with right now. Because I have to admit, when you said that, you had a chance to talk to Brianna Wu, and I covered on Clownfish, we covered her, basically saying her own side was getting ridiculous. I'm like, well, we used to all get along. Everybody, it's so weird. I used to table with people at conventions that just became batshit crazy when 2016 rolled around with politics. Like, these are people I knew for years. We never had a problem. Nobody asked what your political affiliation was. Nobody asked what your religious beliefs were. Nobody, you know what I'm saying? Like, that was a personal thing. As long as it's not interfering with you functioning as a human being from day to day, or trying to destroy somebody else's business or whatever, it wasn't an issue until it was. And it was 2015, 2016. I distinctly remember when I knew something was in the water. There was someone we'd been friends with for years. And, we always would see her. We'd do the conventions, and we always would see her at the cons. And we were having a conversation about, we were both at the time, both Bernie Sanders supporters. And we were having a conversation about Trump, and he was having, whatever, he had his speech. And I was like, well, maybe some of the points aren't terribly bad. And it was kind of like, that SNL sketch with the vaccine. Have you seen that one?
I don't know if I have. You might
okay.
Have
so they're sitting around the table, and they're having questions about COVID, and they're like, careful. It was like that. I could see in her eyes, like, don't you even dare give that man even 1%.
Yeah, I had some relatives like this. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and you could see it, like we were talking about, like, yeah, Bernie, because I told her, I said, I'm pretty disgusted how the Democrats treated Bernie. I said, I don't even know if I'm going to vote next election. And I didn't. I actually wound up not voting. But I was like, they tanked him. He was clearly the choice. And they tanked him for Hillary, and I'm not real happy about that. And I don't know if I'm going to vote. And she's like, "Oh, that sucks." And then, she's like, "Well, what do you think about Trump?" I'm like, "Well, I watched his speech. Some of the points he has are." She's like, "Careful, that look in her eyes." And I can tell you after that, and I wasn't given a glowing endorsement of Donald Trump on any level. I was just like, well, he made some pretty good points, in his speech. I just don't think I'm going to vote, but whatever. And that was like it. Like, I don't think we ever really talked much after that, because she made up her mind that I was a filthy Trump supporter or something, and this is in the pop cultures, but it was like us just hanging out at conventions, just having the conversation. Then I started to see other people that, like, I've met them at cons. They're normal in real life, but they are terminally online, and they become different. I wouldn't say they become different people, but I think it magnifies the worst qualities of people. You start reading their tweet thread and you're like, this is like a perverted version of this person. Like, I understand what they're saying. I could see them saying this, but not to this level, in person. Like, they would never actually say this to your face.
Yeah, no, in that way, social media has been very detrimental to some people. Yeah, I know. I have known people like that where like they were very close to me that I've known like all my life growing up at church. And then you see their Facebook posts, you're like, whoa.
Yeah. I mean, that's it's just it brings out. I feel like it's like the inhibitor chip is taken off your neck, right? And all of a sudden, it's like the tentacles are taken over, and you think you can say whatever you want to say with impunity. And the fact that people are sitting down and talking in real life now, whether it's on a podcast or whatever, and I think we almost need to realize that we're dealing with human beings on the other side of the screen, right? Mm-hmm. And I think if you could actually sit down with people, if people are actually legitimately nerds and they're in the nerd stuff and actually focus on what brings us together rather than just screaming at each other, I think we get a lot further. And I think we need to have 100%. More of that. But it depends on what the motivations are, right? Because some people don't want it to end.
No, that's my problem. Don't. That's what I'm running up against now. Is that there are many people expect. I don't want to do this side thing because I always get in trouble because people always think I'm on his side. I really have never thought of myself in that way. But for the intents and purposes of this conversation, there are many people on our side.
I use air quotes because I would say it's a if you're on a side, it's because people put you on a side. If you're on a side, it's because an algorithm put you on the side. Some of the people on that side I know and I get along with fine. Some of these people I have, honest to God, never met, never talked to my entire life. And people are like making out like we're hanging out together. I'm like, I don't even know this person. Like, just because we come up in their YouTube recommendations doesn't mean we actually hang out together,
Yeah. It is a problem though, because I do have, we talked about this before this start about how basically working in news in any of its forms is dead. It's just died because Google cut off all the traffic. The ad rates are it's ridiculous. It's pennies what you were getting from just even a year ago. And so it's like people are so desperate to stay afloat that there are people who are like, well, outrage worked. That worked, right? And so I do know people, and though they disparage me and want to start things, I understand why they're doing it. Yeah. And so that's kind of what they want to do, and they go after it. I don't think it's helpful, and I don't think it works, but I understand why they go there. But I really think it is important. Like, I think it is really important that we do try to strive for normalcy. I think that is a value that is so special. Being a nerd, being a geek is such a special thing. It is so wonderful. It doesn't need to be subverted or put beneath politics or other concerns. I think it is the most wonderful thing in the world. It's one of those things that makes life worth living. It is so fantastic because the new Doom movie's out, and I could talk with people about Frank Herbert and his crazy writings. That Frank Herbert, he was an interesting guy, and that's awesome. That's such a special, awesome thing. And sometimes I feel like our energy that we want for whatever reason to push it, to change it for more clicks, more outrage, more politics, whatever. I think it denigrates it some. And I think we do have an opportunity in the midst of all this chaos. And that is so destructive. So many people, including myself, who works freelance, who has a lot fewer jobs right now than I did a few months ago.
I'm sorry. I tried.
I do think this is an opportunity in front of us that we should take. Because I just I want more of that. Like FF7 Rebirth came out. And do I hear anyone talking about Tifa's politics? Do I need to know about And this is even with the first game remake, people were writing about Barrett and his role in the black culture related to the American experience. None of that is happening right now. People are normal. I think that's good, and we should want more of that. I know all that was a mess, but I do think there are positives in the midst of all this anarchy, and I think we should strive for them. Like, even if I don't get work, if people just want to be normal again, that might be a fair trade-off in my mind.
Yeah, no, I mean, there always needed to be a plan. Like, what happens after the culture war? Regardless of what the outcome is, what happens? Like, I feel like there needs to be a period of reconstruction. But there are some people that they're never going to leave the war. And I'm talking on both sides. Like, they're never going to leave the war. That's where their head is. They're always going to be fighting, looking for it. But I guess the rest of us just move on. I would love to get excited about nerd stuff again. There are comics coming out. There are games coming out. There are a couple movies coming out that I'm legitimately excited about, and I haven't felt this way in a long time.
Mm-hmm.
It's not because they're not broke or whatever. I'm like, no, I'm actually legitimately excited about this stuff. It doesn't have the stink on it that something like Star Wars or Ghostbusters or what. Well, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, I'm super excited about. I'm really looking forward to that one. But it just feels like there is a sea change here, and I hope that people can acknowledge that it might be time to move on. It might be time. Like, you don't have to agree with somebody. You don't have to agree with their politics. Not every piece of content is for every person. I'm sorry to that guy who did that gay romance movie rom-com or whatever. He blamed a bunch of straight people for not going. I'm like, I'm sorry it wasn't for me. That doesn't mean it can't exist. It wasn't for me.
Very
Good luck
niche
with that
product.
Very niche product, but it does seem like a lot of the companies are starting to be like, yeah, you know what? We're alienating like 80% of our audience. And then these journos are out there and our PR people are out there and they're killing off the rest of the interest in this. Maybe we should just try stopping that. Maybe we should just put the product out and let people make up their own minds about it. Does that work? Maybe that'll work. And that seems to be what they're doing, So, but there are going to be holdouts. There are going to be people that are like, yeah, we don't want this because, we loved having power for 10 years. We loved being able to tell people what to think and, kind of hold that. But I'm seeing at conventions. I mean, a couple of years ago, certain people weren't allowed to comic conventions. They blacklist you. That's not happening anymore. Certain people weren't allowed, certain publishers. That's not happening anymore. I mean, short of like being caught on camera punching a kitten in the face, it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to get canceled now. I think, compared to a couple of years ago, compared to like 3 or 4 years ago. And I think that there are some cases like, well, look at Shane Gillis. I mean, Shane Gillis was fired from SNL because of a couple things he said in his podcast. But then he got to host SNL. Not only did he get to host SNL, he got to host SNL. He got a Netflix deal and he got a Bud Light commercial. Like, what I'm saying?
It's
like
the holy grail of comedians.
Yeah, it was like that never happens, but it is so hard. They keep trying to get people canceled. It's not working now. But again, you have to realize like, hey, at some point, if you're really into this geek stuff, just, we won. I think we did. I think like, and by we, I mean geeks. I think we ultimately won because, we showed the people that produce this stuff, like what we will and will not support, what we're into, what we're not into. And now we have all that sludge of, marketing and PR trickery that's been going on kind of getting washed away, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a rain. I hope it's a cleansing rain. Yeah, I think you're right, though. I think that great stories are timeless, and that is what people find value in, and that's what sticks around. I love listening to, I love reading old science fiction stories, listening to like the adaptations thereof, stuff from like 30s, 40s, 50s, even 60s. And it's like a great story can be forever. Like a really well told story that has value, that just rises above so much. And I couldn't tell you for the life of me what was the politics or what was the hot issue, and when the Twilight Zone came. I mean, like I know a little bit about like Cold War, Kennedy, etc. But those stories from that they stick around now. They probably will always stick around, and that's awesome. This is good. Like so much stuff right now sucks, but this is a good thing. This change is a good thing. And I think that should bring us a lot of joy. It brings me a lot of joy. Now, if only Doctor Who. See, the Doctor Who is owned by the BBC, which is a public, government-owned situation. So they're just too slow to learn. But it seems like for other parts, the privately owned companies, it seems like, okay, now we're getting out of the tunnel. This is good. This is good.
The market always corrects itself, right? Almost always. Almost always.
I hope so.
But hey, thank you so much, Peter, for coming on. It's been great catching up with you. Where can people find more of you?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. And by the way, I said I'm not getting lots of work. I wasn't blaming you. I mean, that's across the board. And all my freelance friends, because everyone's out of a job in news, so everyone wants the freelance job. So the more people get fired, the more people are competing trying to get the freelance gigs, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So it's not just you. I did that. Well, that wasn't what I was trying to say.
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, like I said, you did fantastic work for clownfishtv.com. We have a website, by the way. You can't find it now on Google. Thank you very much. But we do. But I just got to the point where I'm like, we're not making enough ad revenue. Just everything just dropped off a cliff. But I want you to know that all of you guys did fantastic work. And if I can figure out a miracle solution to resuscitate the website, I definitely will give you a call.
No, I understand. You can find me, of course, on Twitter at HappyWarriorP, where sometimes I've spent a little bit too much time. But mostly the thing I do lately is Culturescape, the show that interviews the geeks and nerds that built nerd culture. I can't talk. That interviews the geeks who built nerd culture. Thank you. Wonderful show I do. I do usually 60 to 90-minute interviews with creators, authors, writers, just people all over geek culture. So we've interviewed voice actors like Vic Mignogna, Kerbofer. We have another one in the works I'm really looking forward to talking to. We do comic book artists. I already mentioned Chuck Dixon earlier in the interview. Lovable man. Just really a really nice guy. We've had people like Miss Frost, or other controversial people like Taylor Lorenz.
Yeah.
So you just never know who's going to show up on this show. I'm amazed this many people are willing to talk to me, but it's a good show. This is my baby. This is what I put all my heart and effort into, and I'm pretty happy with it. Me and my editor Chris, we work hard at it, and I think if people check it out, they will enjoy it a lot.
Okay, well, thank you again for coming on. I'll have to swing by.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Like I said, I love what you do. I always enjoy listening to you and your wife argue about stuff. It's fun.
All right. Hey, thank you so much, Peter. Please give us a sub wherever you found this episode, whether it's on Spotify or where are we at? iTunes, Amazon. We're all over the place. YouTube. We can watch. I guess you can't watch the video versions of this one, but we have lots of videos on YouTube. And of course, clownfishtv.com. We do have a website. I got to remind people of that. Thank you so much for listening, guys. We'll talk later. Thanks again for listening. More news and videos are available on our website at www.clownfishtv.com and on our YouTube channel, Clownfish TV. You can buy official merchandise, Clownfish comic books, and more at shopclownfish.com. If you like this show, please consider subscribing and leaving us a positive review on iTunes and other podcast platforms. If you're looking to help support this show financially, go to clownfishsupport.com. If you would like to sponsor an episode of this show, send us an email at business@webreef.io. This podcast is a production of Clownfish Studios, LLC and Web Reef Media, proudly made in Pittsburgh, USA.